This module will focus on RiskMAP products, the Flood Risk Database, the Flood Risk Report, and the Flood Risk Map. These products will contribute to understanding flood risks and promoting mitigation activities that will lead to a reduction in flood risks inherent in each watershed. RiskMAP products can assist with floodplain management and community rating system, hazard mitigation planning, general or comprehensive planning, capital improvement planning, public outreach, hazard mitigation assistant grant application prioritization and support, including benefit cost analysis screening, other non-FEMA grants to reduce flood risk, and response and recovery planning. The Flood Risk Report provides a narrative of the flood risk assessment methodology and results. There will be a section for each community that provides an overview of their risk and alternatives that may be taken to reduce their risk. The Flood Risk Map depicts select flood risk data for jurisdictions within the project area, emphasizing that risk reduction activities may have an impact beyond the site. The Flood Risk Database is the primary source to access information collected and developed during the flood risk assessment process. A subsequent learning module will be developed on the uses of the Flood Risk Database. Floodplain mapping pre-RiskMAP generated three types of products: the Flood Insurance Rate Map Database, the Flood Insurance Study, and the Flood Insurance Rate Map, or FIRM. These are all regulatory products used for floodplain management and to establish mandatory flood insurance purchase requirements. The non-regulatory products being created through the RiskMAP program include the Flood Risk Database, the Flood Risk Map, and the Flood Risk Report. These products do not seek to replace the regulatory products. Those will continue to be produced for each study. The new non-regulatory products are intended to provide additional information to increase flood risk understanding and awareness, risk communication, collaboration, and mitigation. The Flood Insurance Rate Map Database stores the Geographic Information System, or GIS-based attributes of the digital firms and has specific requirements for database design considerations, technical content, and metadata. The firm database is designed to facilitate access to, as well as collection, storage, and processing of, data developed by FEMA for the National Flood Insurance Program. The firm database content will vary based on the data available and/or developed for a particular flood study or mapping project. All digital firms will contain certain standard features: a base map that is distributed with the digital files, the features shown on a printed flood insurance rate map, such as floodplain boundaries, base flood elevations, regulatory floodways, cross-sections, and benchmarks, an electronic flood insurance study report text, tables, and flood profiles, and Federal Geographic Data Committee compliant metadata. In addition to the elements listed above, some digital firm databases may contain pertinent backup engineering data needed by FEMA, FEMA contractors, and FEMA mapping partners for FEMA contracted flood studies and mapping projects, community-initiated map revisions, or map maintenance activities. The DFIRM database includes information needed for core National Flood Insurance Program functions, such as insurance rating and compliance monitoring. The DFIRM database includes sufficient data to allow users to reproduce the flood profiles and water surface elevations. Additionally, the DFIRM database stores original products and intermediate products of high value and/or wide applicability. The DFIRM database does not include all intermediate data developed in the course of conducting the flood study or mapping project. Some of the DFIRM database features may be stored in GIS mapping layers or related tables, but not shown on the paper DFIRM product. The Flood Risk Database provides a framework for storage of the RiskMAP datasets. The Flood Risk Database is the product that contains the raw data and results from the flood risk assessment analysis. It includes all of the datasets generated for a community, including the changes since last firm, areas of mitigation interest, flood risk assessment, and flood depth and analysis grids. The Flood Risk Database will be the flood risk product that will contain the results of the following flood risk assessment data: averaged annualized loss using HAZUS for the entire study area, refined HAZUS results for areas restudied, composite flood risk assessment, analysis required for flood risk assessment data in the Flood Risk Report, analysis required for flood risk assessment data in the Flood Risk Map. The features and benefits of the Flood Risk Database include single source of complete risk assessment analysis, refined HAZUS loss estimate. It's a useful tool to effectively identify and communicate flood risk, and local officials may also create their own customized maps from the Flood risk database. Intended users include GIS departments, planners with GIS skills, and engineers and surveyors. A flood insurance study, or FIS, is the report that contains information regarding flooding in a community and is developed in conjunction with the Flood Insurance Rate Map, or FIRM. The FIS, also known as a flood insurance study, frequently requires a narrative of the flood history of a community and discusses the engineering methods used to develop the FIRMs. The study also contains a summary of the discharges, floodway data, and flood profiles for studied flooding sources and can be used to determine base flood elevations for some areas. The Flood Risk Report provides communities with a summary of the flood risk data that was developed during the flood risk analysis. Data within this report is reported both at the community level and the watershed level. The features and benefits of the Flood Risk Report include the following. It provides communities with a high-level summary of flood risk within the watershed or a project area that may be included in the mitigation plan. There's detailed information on specific areas. It is a useful tool for prioritizing mitigation actions and resources, and it's a useful tool for risk communication and outreach. The intended users for the Flood Risk Report include community officials and local leaders, planners, and engineers. A flood insurance rate map, or FIRM, is the official map of a community on which FEMA has delineated both the special hazard areas and the risk premium zones applicable to the community. It is used by private citizens, insurance brokers, community officials, lending institutions, and federal agencies. The Flood Risk Map contains data from the Flood Risk Database that depicts flood risk, including hazardous risk assessment results and selected areas of mitigation interest. The Flood Risk Map provides local officials with a high-level flood risk overview of the watershed to enable local officials to identify flood risk hotspots and areas of mitigation interest and to facilitate coordination with neighboring upstream and downstream communities. The Flood Risk Map will also include the composite total 1% annual chance loss per census block as one of the GIS layers and tables with losses per community. The features and benefits of the Flood Risk Map include the following. It visually depicts areas with the greatest flood risk within a community or watershed. It provides specific areas of focus for community consideration. It shows the interrelation of flooding issues across jurisdictional borders within a study area, combines multiple data sets from the Flood Risk Database into one map, and helps local officials present risk visually. Intended users for the Flood Risk Map include community officials and local leaders, developers, planners, and citizens. The Flood Risk Database intends to provide a standard and systematic method for FEMA to collect, store, and distribute comprehensive details of flood studies to the public in a digital format. The database was designed to collect and present the non-regulatory flood hazard information collected by FEMA and its mapping partners during a flood risk project, including the Flood Risk Report and the Flood Risk Map. Users who need to know, for example, the probability of being flooded in a particular year, what annual damages can be expected in a community, or what the 1% annual chance flood depth is for a location, will be able to use this database to determine this information. Flood risk assessment data is distributed within the database as well as Flood Risk Map and Flood Risk Report. As noted earlier, the Flood Risk Database stores all of the data in the database.